Sing of the cataclysmic wrath of great Achilles, son of Peleus, which caused the Greeks immeasurable pain, and set so many noble souls of heroes to Hades, and made the men spoils of dogs, a banquets for the birds. And so the plan of Zeus unfolded, starting with the conflict between great Agamemnon, the lord of men, and glorious Achilles.
I love it when you read to me.
Yeah.
You know it.
Yep. That was the Iliad Book 1, lines 1 to 8. That was Emily Wilson's translation. That's one of my favorites. But Justin, before superheroes, before the franchises.
You're going to hate me. Ancient Greek myth was represented by two separate but equally important epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And these are their stories. Bum, bum.
I love that. I love that. Well, hey, welcome to the Fiction Podcast with your host, Frank, and
Justin.
We are so excited to be back recording. This is our first episode, season 4, The Ancient World. And for Justin and I, like we told you in our promo episode, this is something that's been near and dear to our heart. So we are covering the ancient world. We're going to do it through the lens of Homer's The Iliad and The Odyssey, with the ending being the movie The Odyssey coming out this year, July 2026. And so we're going to work from starting with the epic poems, and then we're going to cover different films and books that cover the ancient world, and talking primarily about the hero, the heroic figure, and working through that through different cultures. So obviously we have to start with the prime material, and that is Homer's The Iliad and The Odyssey. Now, again, I'm going to put an asterisk here, right? We mentioned this last week in our episode. Prime material meaning that for most of the Western culture, they see Homer's The Iliad and The Odyssey as sort of the prime classics, as far as this is what pretty much gets the written word started. Now, I understand there are other materials. There's Gilgamesh, there's other things out there. But just like Shakespeare is to the Middle Ages and beyond, I think Homer is to the ancient world. So we thought, you know what, we learned this while we were studying classics at the PAW, and we thought, who better to help explain this, because they explain it to us, than our actual professors that we learned at the PAW. So we brought them to our podcast. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce Professors Rebecca Schindler and Pedar Foss to this podcast. Thank you for joining us.
I'm so excited.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is great.
Nice. Well,
it's good to see both of you guys again. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Apparently Frank looks the same, but I do not.
True.
You know, just like the golden heroes of old. I guess the gods have blessed me, and I don't. I'm joking.
I'm gonna just take this for a minute.
Hey, you didn't tell us we could bring that.
You can have as much vino as you want.
I just have my tea here.
You know, we didn't. We just assumed that since we're talking about the classics, that a classic wine or something would be included, but that is our fault. We should never assume.
I was still nervous whether or not we're allowed to drink around you. So I wasn't sure. Like I didn't know.
Why? I never stopped you before.
Just saying.
There we go. Well, we know you two, but obviously the folks who are listening do not. So can you just in turn just share a couple of things about yourself, your background, and if you want to, a fun fact about either Justin and I. It is completely up to you. I would prefer you don't, but the floor is yours.
All right, I'll go first. Yeah, so I'm a professor of classics and classical archaeology, Mediterranean archaeology at DePauw. I'm a field archaeologist, so I've been working across the Mediterranean for the last over 35 years. But at DePauw, I get to teach courses in ancient history, classics, classical literature, Greek, Latin. I just finished teaching the Iliad in my Greek world class. I'll be teaching the Odyssey again next fall. So I love talking about these texts, and it's great to talk about them with both of you. And I will say that I looked back at my old grade books in preparation for this, because I was trying to remember exactly which classes you each had with me. And I knew Justin had Latin with me.
Okay, that doesn't count. That's my
And
worst
I will,
class.
well, it was not probably your worst class, but I would say that I will just give you lots of props for persisting with classical studies after that first year of Latin. So,
I
yeah, but I do remember
defending
having you in
myself.
Latin class. So,
I think about that class often, and I do want to say, in my own defense, where I felt bad was because I was very far advanced in Spanish, and I learned very early on that I could maybe 20 years later admit to this, that I may or may not have very heavily leaned on my Spanish translations to get through my Latin
to get through Latin.
courses.
Yeah, it might not have served you so well, but okay. But it's ancient history, so that's
Yeah,
fine.
something like
Yeah.
that.
It is. It is.
All right. Hey guys. So I'm an archaeologist too, like Schindler. Worked all around the Mediterranean, North Africa, island of Crete, spent one season at ancient Troy, which might come up in this episode at some point, we'll see.
I did not know that.
But I'm sort of most known for my work at Pompeii. And I love to teach Latin too, because who wouldn't? It's awesome.
And you're a bit modest.
Great.
You have a couple publications regarding your work at Pompeii.
Yes, and working on another big one right now. So
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Professor, I can't. Sorry, I can't do first names. I know we can, but I can't. It's not going to happen. So, Professor Schindler, you did teach a class. I can't remember. It was like ancient myth and culture or something of that note. And I do remember a big like aha moment was when we were talking about Dionysius and how similar he was to myths that followed him, how similar he was to Jesus. And there was a lot of debate in that class, and I love the way you handle that. So that is literally something that's burned in my mind. And Professor Foss, when we're talking about Latin, I really wish I took Latin, but I do remember coming to you one point and asking you, which one should I take? And in your quintessential fashion, you're like, do you want to challenge yourself? And I really didn't. But you asked me the question. I said, yes, I do want to challenge myself. And that's what happened. I took Greek, and I really challenged
There you go.
myself. So
I
thank you.
will also toss out. I was trying to remember all of the classes I had with both of you and Professor Schindler. We had Latin, obviously. Thank you for that. I was trying to get through this entire conversation without discussing it. I think we had a mythology class together. I think we had an ancient history class together as well. And I was going through all of that and how much I loved them. And then Professor Foss, we had the Pompeii course that you taught, and I loved that. And I very fondly remember I don't know if it was an architecture course, but it was where we had to build a replica of an ancient building. And I remember that very fondly as well. So
we both
Yeah.
did that.
What did you build, Justin?
I built the Pantheon.
Remember?
The Pantheon.
You built the Pantheon.
Ooh.
I'm afraid the Pantheon didn't make the move to our new classics
That's all right.
location.
I also remember you telling me that, because it was my favorite building, and I remember you telling me that's going to be very difficult, but you go for it. So
And
I tried.
I was impressed. I have to say, the use of a plastic garbage can top for the dome was quite ingenious.
Thank you.
Nice,
Thank you.
nice.
That's about all I got. That's all I had for art. That's the most talented thing I've ever done artistically. So thank you.
You peaked too soon.
Yeah, that was it.
Well, I love it. Like, Professor Schindler, you mentioned, you're teaching these two works right now, or you just taught one, going to teach the other. I think it's important just to drill down, just to really get to like the basics, not even the works itself, but what are these? Why are these important? What is it about these that one drew in audiences from the ancient world, right? So we know that the Greeks were listening to this, or they also had the written works, and this has continued to be transcribed and translated as we move forward. So just starting with the simple beginning, tell us about the works themselves and why they're so important. Very open-ended. So take whatever path you like to go.
Well, I think you could ask, a dozen classics professors, and they'd give you a dozen different answers to that question. So I like to start by thinking that we have to remember that we're talking about a world in which TV doesn't exist, movies don't exist, right? Even basic forms of communication don't exist. And so the performance of these types of poems, the oral tradition of a itinerant bard who goes around and tells stories, would have drawn in audiences, right? Because this is a way of connecting from your little hamlet or corner of the Mediterranean world with what's happening out there in the bigger world. So this tradition, right, of communicating ideas and culture, right, through poetry, it really starts in the 8th century BC. That's generally around the time, right, that we think these poems were composed, somewhere around 750 BC. And now the specifics of like the Iliad and the Odyssey, they're part of a much probably greater corpus of poems about for what in the 8th century would have been the ancient world for them, so the Bronze Age world of the ancient Mediterranean. And this was a way for people to build a shared right set of values around their history and their foundational stories. So that's sort of one way to think about this. They're entertainment, right?
Hmm.
For sure, from the ancient world. And they're epic, which means they're really grandiose
Yeah.
in scale. But I think
We like
why the
epics.
Iliad, yeah, why the Iliad and the Odyssey persist is because they also focus down on these individual characters whom we can all, to some extent, right, find some connection to.
I think the oral component is really critical, and we didn't really even understand how important that was until a Harvard researcher in the 1930s named Milman Perry went to Yugoslavia and found bards who were still telling
Oh,
tales that were 10,000 lines long from memory, but they weren't exactly memorized. What the key thing that you found out was that these bards were composing on the fly. Every
wow.
single time they did a performance, it was slightly different. They were
Wow.
riffing on themes. It was more like jazz than some sort of symphony that had a score. And this changed the way that we thought about those epics. The ones that we have down, the written down form, was someone or some people that we end up calling Homer, putting it into the new technology of script borrowed from the Phoenicians, which must have been incredibly exciting to find
Yeah.
a way to put it down in a way that could endure beyond the memory of a single bard.
That
Oh,
I'm
go ahead.
learning new things already. This is amazing.
I've witnessed something like this in person because I did excavate on Cyprus one summer in the 90s, and we lived in a village with Cypriot fishermen, and they used to take us out on their boats to the island that we were excavating and then bring us back in the evening. But on the weekends, they would gather on the beach, and we'd essentially have a Cypriot style like barbecue with an open fire and grilling sausages and cheese. But as the evening went on, they would start to sing. And there's a Cypriot epic that has to do with a sailor who leaves town and leaves his beloved behind, and she stands on the shore and she's pining for him and he's pining for her. These men would sing this song, but they would pass it from one person to the next, right? So
Um,
one person would sing a certain number of verses and then pass it to the next. And so just as Foss was saying with the Yugoslavian singers, the general trajectory of the story was always the same, right? But each person would add their own little individual like voice to it or use of
mhm.
language or descriptive words, that sort of thing. So it slightly changed each time this song was sung. Now I don't think it was 10,000 lines long. It wasn't nearly as long as these epics. But it gave me a real appreciation and sense for how the Homeric epics would have been composed originally and
Y-
performed.
No, that kind of
I
sounds.
watched a similar thing happening on the island of Crete when I was digging there. It was a performance that went on for 7 hours. I don't remember much
Oh,
because there was a lot of wine. So can't tell
see,
you much more than
you
that.
know what? That's how they get you. They're like, We've got a
Yeah.
7 hour performance. Here's all the wine you can drink." By hour 3, they're
Mhm.
repeating. You don't even know.
Exactly.
It's the
That
ambiance. I
sounds
like it.
like that sounds amazing, and I feel like I need to go on an adventure now. Like I feel like
I
I'm
do.
missing out on not having one of these stories.
No, but like the question on that though, because I mean, we have these epic poems, right? So the Iliad is obviously longer than the Odyssey by some length, but it's my understanding, right, though, but like when these bards were riffing on some versions of the Iliad or the Odyssey, that it was never obviously this complete picture. But just taking the Iliad by itself, I find it hard to believe that somebody would maybe one night, or if it's over 3 nights, compose, orally the full Iliad, right? So is it like when you've done your research, does it seem like that maybe they take parts? There's been parts like different myths or different folklore or legends that talk about, Troy, or talk about Menelaus, and talk about, this, and this is somehow all composed together? Or do you think that somebody actually did stitch this together orally and some version of it has survived in a written format?
I think that's a really good question, whether it was stitched together orally in some form that eventually was ready to be written down, or whether it came together in its written form. I don't think we know. What do you think, Schindler?
Yeah, I don't think we know. I think that I mean, we do know that there were other poems that tell the beginning
Mhm.
of the story of the Iliad. Because remember, the Iliad starts in medias res, right, in the middle of things. We're in the 10th year of the war already, so much action has happened in the previous 9 years, and also the origin of the war, like
Mhm.
why they went to war in the first place, the story of Helen and Menelaus. Paris. But and then there's stories afterwards, right? The Odyssey is part of the so-called returns or the Nostoi, and presumably there were other poems out there about how Menelaus gets home. What happened to Agamemnon after he gets home, right?
Yeah.
Some of the other heroes, right, like Ajax, who gets lost and ends up in South Italy somewhere. Um, so one interesting question is always to ask, like, why just this part, the Iliad, and then subsequently the Odyssey, are the two, like, complete poems that
Mhm.
survive, and the other ones we have tiny little references to and fragments.
So when we're talking
Is
about,
there?
oh, go
Oh,
ahead,
go ahead.
Justin.
I was gonna say, well, then, is there a best guess for the two of you? What would be your best guess as to why these are the two that survive?
They're the
Hmm.
best.
No, I don't know. I mean,
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure there
naturally,
was a variation in quality between all these stories, and maybe these were the ones that got the most likes, if you would.
yeah. There you
Oh,
go.
Yeah.
I would love
They're
to
the
see
ones
some.
that people wanted
To
They're the
hear
ones that
over and
people
over
wanted to
again.
hear over and over again. I do think that, going back to previous comments, that epics are generally like really sweeping in scale and scope, and they're like monumental in their consequences. But these two stories in particular have managed to really capture the like internal monologue of these two men, right? Achilles on the one hand and Odysseus on the other, as well as some of the other secondary
Hmm.
characters, right? In
Hmm.
both of these epics, like Agamemnon and the Iliad and Hector, right? Priam at the end of the Iliad. But this sort of deep, like almost psychological, right, study of these characters really draws the audience in, right? You really want to get to know these two men. You want to understand them, their motivations, right? Their decision making, the consequences of their decisions, and what is it that they really truly value, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that they're not just popcorn flicks, action flicks. They have deep emotional resonance. It made me think this prompt tonight of the first time I had encountered them, and I think I was like 10 years old. I was living in a farm in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. That's the actual name of the town. And on our shelves, we had a set of books called the Great Books of Western Literature, right? And it was
Hmm.
very imposing and almost sort of dared you not to read any of them because they looked too important. But I grabbed the first book. I thought I should start at the beginning because on a farm, you get bored a lot. And I was reading it through, and I remember one passage really struck me. Is it okay if I read it to you?
Yes.
Please do.
Yes.
Yes.
So this is after Achilles has just learned that his best bud, Patroclus, has been killed when he was putting on Achilles' armor because the Greeks needed a little boost they were getting beaten pretty bad by the Trojans. I'm sure you'll get to that later on in the pod. And I remember reading this passage, and it says, "A mist of black grief enveloped Achilles. He scooped up fistfuls of sun-burnt dust and poured it on his head, fouling his beautiful face. Black ash grimed his fine spun cloak as he stretched his huge body out in the dust and just lay there, tearing out his hair with his hands." And when I read that as a kid, I just thought, what kind of grief is that? I mean, the scale and the depth of that grief. And it really grabbed me. So that was my first memory of the Homeric epics back then.
I mean, Frank,
Sorry, I really put a damper on things.
No, I just feel so over my head because the first time I read them, I was 18 in Professor Guinea's class. And I'm like, when I was 10, I was thinking I might have just gotten out of Sesame Street. So I'm still trying to put this together.
That was literally the same thought I had. I was like, 10. Goosebumps? No, I don't know.
Like I said, it was pretty boring on the farm.
No, that is a very good passage. And I think a lot of, for me, I mentioned this, Justin and I talked about this in our last episode, is that I enjoy the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I think because of the context that I was giving and understanding the role that the poems played makes it easier, right? Because take the Iliad, they talk about the lineage, like the Bible, and they spend a lot of time really breaking that down. Even in battle, they stop and tell each other, hey, my name is Ajax. I'm the big Ajax. And my dad was, and listen, I get it, but I understand for the modern reader that they may not. But what I will say is passages like that emotion translates no matter when you're reading it, right? 100 years ago or today. So that's one of the reasons why I think it still translates to the modern reader. But, your 10-year-old self or yourself now, like, why do you think, this still survives as a great work? Not just because it's one of the great Western works, right, in a dusty binder, but why is it still live and living, with you both, but your professions, your students, Hollywood? Why do you think it still hits?
I think it asks big questions. It asks questions like, who am I? And what's my purpose here? What am I supposed to be doing in society? If I'm away from home, how do I get back? If I'm seeking power, what's the cost of achieving it? What does it mean to have a friend? And what does it mean to find love? And can you keep it? And what endures after death? These are all wrapped into the situations that the characters in these stories find themselves. And they're questions that we ask all the time because they never really get answered. They just get worked throughout the history of humanity.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, both Achilles, well, all the characters, Achilles, Agamemnon, Hector even, but Achilles and Odysseus, they're really flawed individuals,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But they're
Slightly.
flawed so what happens when you put a flawed individual, right, into these like desperate situations that are partly of their own making, but partly out of their control, right? And as the audience, right, it forces us to confront those kinds of big questions that Foss was just talking about, right? What would we do in that situation, right? What values are we going to hold on to? And what are we willing to let go of to achieve our goals or to achieve our aims, right? How are we going to treat others along the way? So I love that you brought up the way they stop in battle and they make these introductions to each other, right? That's so important because, like, it turns out in certain situations, you don't want to kill the enemy because
Yeah.
he's your guest friend, right?
Yep.
Your lineage, your parentage, between the two of you goes back generations. And so, but yet you turn around and then you start fighting the next guy and you're willing to kill him. So, what does that say about a society and its value system and how we interact with each other? It gives us that kind of, it's distant, but it also asks us when we're faced with similar situations, how are we going to respond?
That's fair. That's
Yeah,
fair.
just
Yeah.
working off of that. I mean, it's so clear that you will go to the wall for someone you know really well, your friend, or even someone who's related to you. But if you don't know someone, you're willing to end their life. Why, as humans, do we have that bias towards the people that we know compared to the people that we don't, right? What's the phrase? A stranger is just someone who hasn't become your friend yet. It really brings up some things for us to think about and consider when we decide how to treat each other, either on a personal or on a national scale.
That's
Not
fair.
that that's
No,
relevant.
Right.
we can have a whole podcast on that. But
Yeah, we're
won't.
happy to go that way too.
Well, yeah. So Foss and I have been teaching a course. We're going to teach it again next fall. A new course called Hubris Begets Tyranny, and it's a first year seminar at DePauw. But we start with the Iliad, right? We start with the Iliad because we're looking at specifically Agamemnon, right, and how he treats his role as a leader, right? And again, flawed characters and the mistakes he makes, right, in his
Yep.
leadership. Um, but there, but I would add one another point on your question about why the texts still resonate, and we already alluded to it. Foss read that passage about how the kind of grief that Achilles is feeling. The language of these poems is just stunning, right? When you read it in translation, you mentioned Emily Wilson's translation. So she came out with her Odyssey translation several years ago and many years ago now. And then
And
more recently with the Iliad translation. But I still go back to the Lattimore translation for the Iliad. And of course, it's interesting to pick up multiple different translations.
Mm-hmm.
But the way in which Homer's language is able to capture, right, these intense moments and to really put you in the scene, like you feel like you're next to Achilles on the beach when he's describing in detail not just what he's feeling internally, but how it's making him physically respond to that grief. And the language is inventive, right? Homer invents essentially the simile, the idea of the simile, right? Again, this way of putting you like in the moment, right? But also at a distance because you're not, and he frequently uses insects and animals as his similes, right? I'm
Yep.
sure we could find like my favorite one is about the bees swarming on the beach. Do you know which one? It's in book 2, where he's describing the troops coming, the Greek troops. They've been wanting to go out, right, into battle. And so Homer writes, the troops were moving now and then swarming like insects over the beach, like bees that hum from a hollow rock in an endless line and fly in clusters over flowers in spring, grouping themselves in aerial throngs. And the way he's contrasting this imagery of a pasture with flowers and a beautiful landscape with
Yeah.
the idea that he's describing the humming of the soldiers as they're moving across the plain. Just that trying to capture, right, that sense of what it must be like to be in battle, or
Yeah.
could have been like to be in battle. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think that's why I do like the Emily Wilson's translation, only because I think for a more modern reader, she tries to emote those similes and the words and the actions, but makes it more, I'm not going to say dumbed down, but I think more plain English for folks because you're not reading the traditional Latin or even, I'm sorry, the Greek, but even Latin. So you're not quite getting the rhythm that you would if you
Hmm.
were. So I've tended to, I mean, because I reread them recently and I tended to like them. But because we are talking about the Iliad, I know we should give the Odyssey some play, but we usually like to do just a quick summary of the book or the movie that we're talking about. I think this one, Justin and I agreed, we're just going to do a little playful riff just to get people understanding where we are. So this is sort of like an interlude, a little break. So we'll give you two a second to think on some thoughts. But I drew the straw, the Iliad. Justin drew the straw, the Odyssey. So we didn't say this in the beginning. There are spoilers. That's we assume that you've read this or that you're
Oh
willing to
yeah.
hear spoilers because you want interested to pick it up later. But our summaries are very spoiler free today, which is very good for me. But in honor of Homer, and for those who are listening, I'm putting air quotes here because Homer could be multiple people. I'm going in a poem epic style for my summary. Very short.
Oh my gosh, you're such
very
an
short
overachiever.
Summary. You kidding me? We bring two classical studies professors. You think I won't? Justin, seriously, what's wrong with you? Come on. But very short. Okay. Sing not the war's beginning, but of its breaking point, of Achilles, greatest of the Greeks, and the rage that pulls him from the fight, of kings who crave power, and warriors who pay the price. While armies clash beneath the walls of Troy, the story turns not on victory, but on pride, loss, and the cost of honor. A friend falls, a hero returns, and glory is bought with a life that won't last to enjoy it. There is no tale of war won, but of what it takes to be remembered. That's all I got.
Don't snap for yourself. God, how much ChatGPT did you use for that? Look me in the eyes and tell me you did not use ChatGPT.
You know I write poems, baby. I do that. I actually spent time. Once I knew that we had our guest list, I actually spent time doing that. So
I thought that was thoughtful pomposity.
I think you have too much time in South Dakota that you are doing this.
Well, you put the kids down and then you just you try your brain. So the reason I did that, the main point is, right, like Professor Schindler said, this starts at the 9th year of a 10-year war. We're talking about Achilles and Agamemnon. We're talking about honor. We're talking about people who crave power, but we're talking also about, this is not really, in my opinion, and I would love to hear yours, this is not really a story about war. It really is a story about people, introspection of different folks, and really drilling down about the culture, right? What the culture respects and what they don't, and their norms and what their norms aren't. And I think the war is just sort of its muse. So that is what I got from it. But I would love to hear anyone's take on sort of like their thought on the Iliad itself.
I really like how you crafted the contrast between some of the major players, Achilles, Agamemnon, and even bring in Hector, right? Who didn't have anything to do with starting the war. It was his brother's fault. And now he has to defend his homeland. And he's an honorable guy, right? And he's going to die for it. So he is a good leader, an upright leader, but he's not a very smart leader because he actually goes out to fight Achilles in the end when he should just stay behind the walls.
Just stay behind the walls, man.
He can't bring himself to do that.
Just stay.
So, what compels humans to act against their own best interests, right? And even against the best interests of their community because of the values that have overwhelmed them in terms of what they think they have to do. And it's devastating. It's the loss of an entire civilization at Troy.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we'll just say at a different point of us recording, I was just railing on Hector for doing that. I was furious that he actually does that, and it makes absolutely no sense. Everything is going perfectly fine. Why do you have to step outside? And Frank had to listen to me just go off on a tangent on how angry it made me. Just lost it.
I agree that it makes, every time we read that passage, right, especially when he's saying goodbye to Andromache, his wife, right, and the sort of famous passage in which his son, Astyanax, right, is there, and the baby, right, is afraid of his father in his war helmet. The line that always gets me and Hector's rationale to Andromache is, yes, I know we're going to lose. The city's going to be captured. You're going to be enslaved. And our son's probably going to be killed, although he doesn't actually say that bit. But you'll get to say that you were the wife of the great Hector, right? Whenever I read that, it's devastating, right? And I'm thinking, oh my God, Andromache, who would want to be married to that man? And he's the best of them, right? Like we just said, he's like the best of them. But, right, Hector's greatest fear is that he'll die, right? And no one will be able to say, right, he was the most honorable or noble of the Trojans. So in his calculation, this kind of makes sense, right? that
Mm-hmm.
it's what people say about you after you die that's important.
Mm-hmm. He kind of has to counterbalance his Paris, right? Because and he has to go the opposite direction. But no, I agree with you. That passage
So
always gets me.
you brought up Paris. So this opened up another touch point for me of pure annoyance when we were reviewing this and we were talking about Hector going outside the walls, and then I had to rail on Paris for a little while. I'm just curious, do you struggle at all with Paris and what he did to kind of lead Hector down this road at all? Do you feel that he's just kind of a rough character to love, or do you have like a soft spot for him deep down? Because I really struggle with Paris overall.
Don't we all have a brother or a close relative who's a Paris, right? Who just kind of floats through and does whatever they want, and there doesn't seem to be any consequences, and everyone else has to clean up the mess. And it's so frustrating, but you can't let them go because sometimes they're charming, and sometimes you really remember the good times, and you're close to them. So it's the tug that it's the stress that we can all relate
Yeah.
to.
Well,
I,
quick
I
question.
can
And
neither
oh, go
confirm nor
ahead.
deny, because actually I can confirm he's not going to listen to
Y-
this. He's not going to listen to this. I definitely got one of those.
well, you see, you said he. It could be a relative or brother. We don't know. But
Yeah,
this is,
exactly.
I think, might be a good transition to the Odyssey. But everything we just said about Paris, about Hector, and even maybe Achilles in the same vein, the honor, their decisions, can it really be their fault? Or is it the gods? Because Hector only went out and opened the gates, like, I don't know why, because Zeus promised him he was going to win. I mean, Zeus tricked him, which I don't know. Hector, you should know that all the gods would trick you, but like, can we blame them? I mean, Paris did it because Aphrodite gave him a boon. I mean, so understandably, like Jess and I will talk about this when we cover, spoiler, Troy, when they take out the gods, right? But like, because the gods are so ingrained in this and the Odyssey, can we blame folks for their hubris, for their actions, or are the gods putting a little spice in there? Just rolling your eyes.
I just want to go off so badly.
Well, I think Paris is if you there's a way to read Paris, right? I don't know that it's more sympathetic, but where his connection to Aphrodite is um is a sort of manifested, right, symbolism of his inherent character as, yeah, the pretty boy, the lover, right? The figure who just cares about fulfilling his own desires.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and what's tragic about Paris is that he can't ever change that, right, about himself. Um, so he tries, he kind of tries when he in book 3 when he goes out into the battle and he does agree after with a
Yeah.
lot of prodding, he agrees to fight Menelaus one on one. Um, but in the end, Aphrodite comes and whisks him off the battlefield,
Mhm.
and that's the most direct interaction we have of any deity in the lives of these humans, and brings him back right inside the city of Troy. But you can see that as right. There's just, and I think back to this point, like of identifying with these characters. Don't we all have some personality trait, some tick of ours that try as we might struggle to get over? We just can't overcome, right? It's like so inherent
Mhm.
to our character and who we are. And for Paris, it's his passions, right? His
Yeah.
eros, his desire. He
Mhm.
can't get over it.
When it comes to the gods, students often bring this up. Well, aren't the gods just sort of manipulating puppet masters for the whole thing? And then I ask them, what if you take them out? Can you imagine all those passages that talk about the gods are just outworkings of individual characters' conscience,
I
trying
love that.
to justify or rationalize what they're doing and their motivation, or a really convenient excuse
Mhm. Mhm.
for doing something. You can always blame something that no one can see.
That's true.
That works
That's
pretty
true.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's flip it. We go from the rage of Achilles to the trickery of Odysseus. Justin, you got a
I'm so
summary
annoyed at
for
you.
us?
I'm so annoyed with you. Like, I put this together in 5 bullet points and made it really sarcastic, and now I have to follow your epic poem.
You
So
know,
now I have to like actually try on this, and I'm like lost for words.
5
To do it,
bullets is good, man. We're good.
you could just read the poem you wrote for this, because I know you wrote 2, and then we could just get on with it.
I actually didn't. I left it to you.
You're the worst, Frank. So I'm going to succinctly put this 500-page poem into roughly 5 bullet points.
One.
The roughly the Odyssey is the original hero's journey. Odysseus spends 10 years away at war, and then he has to spend 10 years getting home over the water. He faces storms, monsters, and temptation, as you pointed out, all due to his arrogance and hubris. Finally gets home to realize his palace is overrun with imposters vying for the throne. And I didn't want to give a spoiler, so we won't say what happens.
Dude, that's perfect. That hits it.
No
well
poem.
done.
Anyways, so
we work with our talents.
yeah, well, mine's not poetry. So one thing that Frank and I talked about, and we were looking at this, was the transition of how from the Iliad to the Odyssey, and they are, while by Homer, I use air quotes like Frank, kind of a completely different story. It feels completely different. It reads completely different. And I guess where we would start is, what do you think those major differences are, and why do you think it is such a different story from the Iliad?
Well, they're sort of different in terms of the Iliad being a tragedy, showing the dissolution of society, that Troy, after losing Hector, is going to be destroyed and wiped out. And the Greeks, even though they're going to win, are going to overreach and do terrible war crimes. And most of them aren't even going to get home. And the ones that do have a tough time, except for Menelaus, who seems to always get away with stuff. And the Odyssey is a comedy. It's eventually, without doing too much spoilers, the successful homecoming of the hero after much trouble. So at the beginning, the household is in disarray. The suitors are vying for the hand of Penelope. And I think the most wonderful thing about the poem is how it starts. It starts with the mind of a young man, a teenager who never really knew his dad. Everybody tells stories about his dad. How can he ever live up to his dad? And his mom won't keep these suitors away, and he's not strong enough to do it yet. He doesn't even know how. No one has taught him how to be a grown-up. And he's sitting there moping about while everyone is partying in his courtyard. And this character of Athena floats in, disguised as a traveler, and says, "What's going on here?" And again, you can either read that as literally a goddess, or as his brain starting to try to find alternatives or solutions for getting out of this. And the cool passage, if I can just read one more, is when
go nuts.
Thank you. Yes, Athena says, "Tell me now, are you Odysseus' son? You're so tall. Your handsome face and eyes resemble his. We often met and knew each other well before he went to Troy, where all the best leaders of Argos sailed in hollow ships. From that time on, we've not seen each other." Of course, that's a lie, right? The gods are always lying to the humans. Telemachus was careful as he answered, "Dear guest, I will be frank with you. My mother says that I'm his son, but I can't be sure, since no one knows his own begetting. I wish I were the son of someone lucky who could grow old at home with all his wealth. Instead, the most unlucky man alive is said to be my father, since you ask." So here's a kid with a lot of issues. And we start with him, right?
Yeah.
The main character, Odysseus, isn't even there for the first 4 books. He's not even there.
Yeah.
He's an absent dad. He's an absent husband. He's a philanderer. 8 of those 10 years he's away on the voyage, he's hanging out with beautiful goddesses like Circe and Calypso. And only later, like, "Oh, I guess I should get home. I'll cry a lot to, pretend that I really want to go home." But it's not really clear that he does.
You don't think he wants to go home?
I think he's a little bit ambivalent. I think he has a little bit of doubt about whether Penelope has been faithful all these years. Maybe because he's not been.
I was about to say, so that's his solution?
It's 18 years. It's 18 years. I mean, come
Right,
on.
projection and
yeah,
excuse.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think he has to, because she is the only one who can match his wit. And in fact, she's smarter than he is.
She probably is.
And
Yeah.
he knows that no matter how beautiful or immortal these other women are, there is only one Penelope. And she means home. And I think he just needs to find home.
It was sweet. Wait, that was really sweet. But you started it with all the philandering, and you just skip that part, and then it sounds like it's a really beautiful poem.
You can't wash over the full story. We gotta.
Well, you could have made it sound like he wasn't choosing to be there.
8 years. I mean, I understand initially he was tricked to get there, but isn't he the trickster of tricksters? I mean, I don't know, but okay. This is not an original thought. I borrowed this from Emily Wilson. But I like her rationale that like he is similar to Achilles and Agamemnon than his story initially belies. Because I do think, yes, you're right. He wants to come home because, like you say, that is what he's yearning for. He knows as one of her, it's only limited, right? So he needs to spend time. She's mortal, so he has to be there. But I feel that he feels, just like in this masculine society, that if he stays, he's second fiddle. If he goes home, he will be remembered as the great Odysseus. I mean, he's already remembered for the Trojan War, but he wants more. And I can't help but feel that way, only because it seems like the passage between him and when he was on the island and his rationale for why he wanted to go home. Again, not an original thought, but I agree with Miss Wilson's editor's notes. I don't know. Like, do you all feel like he wanted to be remembered? I mean, I feel like we look at Odysseus and think him different than those folks, but I think he's really similar to them, just using different skill sets.
I'll say one thing and I'll hand it over to Schindler. If he doesn't go home, there's no story. Right? The stories never get told of all his adventures, whether they're true or not, or he just makes them up. He's been maybe thinking about all the things he might have done, all the monsters and everything. But if he doesn't return, there's no story about him and he has no story to tell. And he is the storyteller in many ways. That's his identity.
Yeah, I agree. He has to have the opportunity to tell his story, which in fact is what he does, right? And so we were talking earlier about Homer's inventiveness as a poet. And of course, one of the things he invents is the flashback, like extended flashback. And one of the, like, in anticipation of this version of the Odyssey coming out in the summer, right? One of the curiosities that I think we always have when any new attempt is made at telling this story is, are they going to tell it, right, as Homer tells it, or are they going to tell it in some linear fashion, right, or supposed linear fashion that it's not? So, but yeah, he needs to tell his story. And the other thing I think I would say is trying to put ourselves in that mindset of Odysseus. He is quite ambivalent about going home, clearly. And he's always trying to accumulate more, at least in his own telling of these adventures, more, right, recognition, more loot, more stuff, more of the sort of tangible ways in which one is acknowledged as being heroic, if that's a term we want to attach to him. But he also doesn't know how to be at home, right? Like he can't stay at home. Right. But in the same way that scholars have looked at Achilles and the soldiers at Troy as having lots of parallels to actual historical events, particularly like Vietnam, right, where you're just kind of entrenched for a really, really long time for long periods of time with nothing to do. And then, right, these bursts of battle. Odysseus has like PTSD, right? Like he doesn't know how to go home, right? And he's so in many ways the wandering is really about him trying to to find that way
Yes.
back
Yeah.
home. And that
Good
might
one.
be an actual physical journey, but it's also a psychological journey for him and for Penelope as well, because my absolute favorite simile in the whole thing is at the very end when the two of them finally trust each
Yes.
other
Yes.
enough, right? And there's this a moment in which they embrace, and you just, I mean, you just feel, right, that each of them can finally let their guard down because they're in the one place with the one person whom they can absolutely feel at home with. And that means to absolutely trust, right? And to embrace and not be wary of. And for just a moment, right? They don't have any fear or anxiety, right? Or tension.
Well, we're going to do two quick exercises to sort of wrap us up because I know we can talk about more things in more detail, but we thought that this might be a good way. So the first one is just going to be a quick question. The second one, Justin's going to lead a quick s- rapid
You're gonna
fire
let me do
set
it?
of questions.
Yes.
You prepped it. So the first one, just a
Yeah.
quick question. So you could stick to a main character or you can talk about a side character, male or female. But thinking
Mm.
about today's world, is there a quote unquote Homeric hero or someone in the narrative that you kind of feel fits today's world as someone you would want to actually idolize? Because we have a lot of floral characters, but is there someone, whether in the Iliad or the Odyssey, where you're like, male or female, I think their role, whether small or big in the actual retelling poems, is someone that carries a lot of virtues that really rings true today. And we can start to give you more time if you want, or you can start as the guest. You let us know your preference. I'll start. I'll start. I'm gonna leave off where Professor Schindler started. Penelope is my favorite. I think that listen, the 20-year thing, that is more norm than I think her wish. Like she knew her place in society. But like you said, I think both of you said this, right? So we talked about her smarts, her cunning, her ability to protect what's hers for 10 years. So she had to fight off suitors, right? And she did it in such a smart and cunning way that still allowed her to still be who she was, protected her son, and still had that like small chance that Odysseus will return. And I think even when he returned, she didn't, like you said, she didn't fully trust him yet, right? And he didn't fully trust her for reasons where I'm like, listen, you were 8 years in the wandering there, so you need to like loosen up. But she still held her guard up for good reasons. And so I think her character is someone that has immense faith. She's smart and can stand on her own, but she also realizes the strength in family. So I really felt like that was a really good character. And she actually, for female characters, got a lot of time, even though a lot of female, like except for the gods, they really didn't get much time. So that's my pick.
All right. I'm gonna throw a dart, Frank. So I think it's really difficult to look at a lot of these characters and think any of them are someone you would want to idolize or put up on a pedestal. They are incredibly
Concur.
flawed, and
Concur.
they're kind of terrible people in a lot of ways, and so that's really difficult when I think about it. So I'm gonna go, I guess, back to the Iliad, and I would pick Priam as close as I possibly can get to a human, someone that has some humility, that loves his family, that cares about them deeply, that cares more about his people. He doesn't want war. He didn't want to be in this situation, if I'm remembering everything correctly. And so I think he's probably the most humane, I guess, out of a lot of the characters I can think of that
That's
has
fair.
those traits of things that I would probably value and go that route. So I guess throwing a dart, taking Priam.
Wow. I don't know. Do you have someone who's come to mind, Foss?
I do, I think. I mean, I think I mentioned him earlier. I think, especially because we're teaching this to college students all the time, Telemachus is exactly that age. He's a guy that's trying to figure it out. He has to go on his
Mm-hmm.
own little mini odyssey to the
Mm-hmm.
mainland to meet all of his dad's old war buddies that are still alive and hear their stories. And that's a tale that keeps happening. And he's uncertain about everything. And he has incredible pressure. And I think that's something that people today face as much as they ever have. And it's scary, right? and learning to trust oneself, learning to trust that you've got the right stuff to make it in a tough and unflinching world is a kind of a leap of faith that every young person has to make, especially when they're about to leave college. Like, what's going to happen now? I'm out of the safety net and into the fire, and that's going to be hard. And it's the test of character. And I just love how that plays out in his character.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I agree with Justin. I mean, none of these characters are ones that we would really want to admire. So I'm gonna twist your question a little bit and say who's one of the characters that I empathize with, but don't
Fair.
necessarily admire. Is that okay?
That's fair.
So and and so maybe this is surprising, maybe this isn't, but I am fascinated by Helen. And I think the Greeks were fascinated by Helen as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
She's not a good person
Mhm.
necessarily, but she represents, I think, that lack of control, right? Of someone who is a pawn in this, very masculine world to the values of this masculine world. And we meet, I think what's interesting about her is aside from Odysseus, she's the other character we meet in both of the epics. So we get a sort of window of her at Troy because we see her interacting with Paris. And there's this amazing scene in the Iliad, again in book 3, where she just lays into Aphrodite. And she's like, I'm done with you, right? Controlling my life like this. And you have to give her some credit for that. And then, we meet her again in the Odyssey when she's
Odyssey.
back home with Menelaus, as if none of this ever happened, right? In a way. And yeah, so I think the Greeks never really knew what to do with Helen's character. In subsequent Greek literature, in Greek drama, we find this ambiguity of her character. Is she to blame? Is she not to blame? But Homer does give us these little windows, right, into her personality with some dialogue that we get. And there's some fascinating classical reception out there now by various, contemporary authors that try to expand upon characters like Helen, who we just get a glimpse of in the epics.
I
I think that
always okay.
Helen is.
No,
Do
good.
you want to go, Justin?
No,
I
by
think
all means.
Helen is indeed fascinating, and the part in the Odyssey that's really telling is this is all. There's so much trauma in these books, and people are trying to work through that trauma. One way you can work through trauma is to talk about it with people that you know and you trust. That's what we do with veterans. It's the most effective way of treating trauma. And this happens with Helen, but the other thing that she does is she self-medicates. She brings out the drugs, right? And let's just forget about it, right? At least
Yep.
for a while, because we
Yep.
can't think about it anymore. And in some ways, you could think of both of these poems being performed to audiences and communities that are trying to get by and have had their own trials and tribulations. That it's a kind of communal group therapy
Mhm.
to hear these stories, go think about them, talk about them with your friends, or even get a little catharsis from them, because worse things happen to the characters in the stories than happened to you today. So I guess you can get by.
That's very fairly put. No, I was just gonna add, Professor Schindler, that have you ever played that game where like you're like, oh, if you could have like breakfast, lunch, dinner with anyone dead or alive, people ask that question. And every time I have that question, one of the people I always say is I'd like to have meet for breakfast or lunch or whatever dinner it would be Helen. I was like, I have so many questions and I want to know like what her side of this was. I need to know like what was going on. I just need to know. And so I always select Helen. So I'm glad you chose her as the character because I have a lot of unanswered questions that I would like to know that go down that route. So
I think
I
we
think
all
she's a
do.
great.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
She can't help
Okay.
it that she's pretty,
Yeah,
right?
She cannot.
that's
She
that's
cannot.
fair. That
Yeah.
is
That
fair.
wasn't her doing.
So we usually do a bonus episode where Frank has no idea what's coming, and Frank does not know what's coming here. He's just let me off the reins here, and usually I put him on the spot. But since we have the two of you here, we're going to do a little rapid fire question. This is, I will say, you never cold called, but for all those times that I had to speak in front of class, here we go. So this is me putting you on the spot.
Wow. Wow.
No, it is getting to know our professors.
Okay, so this is rapid fire. This is rapid.
Yep.
Rapid.
So
okay.
So one of you will go, then the other will go. We'll just move on, and it's really just your thoughts and your opinions, but they're just fun questions. I promise. There's nothing too egregious in there. All right. Best and worst movie adaptation of an ancient time, like ancient times. Yeah, you got to think about it. You didn't want to.
There aren't a lot of good ones.
I know, so that's why I want to know which one. If
Spartacus is the best.
All right.
Okay, this is not a good question for me.
I know.
Because there are little things I like about all these, but I would say 300 is one of the worst in some ways, but one of the best in other ways. So that's my answer.
All right. So you have 300 for both. All right. I'm fine with that.
I like that.
Professor Foss, what's the worst?
That's good. I really wanted to like it, but the shark-infested Colosseum in Gladiator 2, I couldn't process it. It literally jumped the shark for me, and
Gladiator 2.
I was done with the film at that point.
Say no more. Say no more. Yeah.
Totally respect that. Yeah. Next question. Favorite country to do a dig in?
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. I mean, right now it's definitely Italy. Food, yeah, the location, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
I will always have a really soft spot for Tunisia. That's in fact where we met. We met in ancient Carthage.
Oh,
it's amazing.
It's kind of romantic.
Yeah. The first time we ever met was in Carthage. Yeah.
My wife and I met in Indianapolis. It's like the same thing. You know?
It totally is.
All right.
At a Chuck E. Cheese.
No. It'd have been a Dave and Buster's at the very least.
Okay.
Give me a little credit. Favorite class to teach? These are all questions I didn't get to ask, and I look back and I'm like, I wish I'd have known these things.
Well, I currently am quite a fan. I mean, it changes, right, over time, but I quite like this course that I'm teaching currently, or not this semester, but next semester, called Myth, Gender, and Power, because it is a class in which I get to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, but I also have the students read some classical reception. So we read Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles. We read Margaret Atwood has a short novel called The Penelopiad that we read in that class. We read Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon in conjunction with the Odyssey.
Like
that class is fun because we get to read a variety of different things.
Love it.
I think my favorite was a first-year seminar called The Ethics of Combat, which looks at the ethical dimensions of physical conflict in the ancient Mediterranean world, mostly focusing on the Greeks, compared to medieval Japan, and had a lab component whereby all of our students took a 10-week martial arts course. So they got to try to put into practice what it meant to face off against an opponent and feel the adrenaline rush, to feel all the physiological and psychological changes that happen when you are faced with a combat situation, and how to work through those things, and how all that is represented in the art and the literature of ancient Greece and Rome and medieval Japan as well. So
I'm so upset. I'm so upset with you.
I was waiting.
I'm so upset with you that this was not taught while I was there.
I'm sorry,
you're making a lot of yeah. We'll talk off.
Frank, we're moving on. All right. This isn't your segment, Frank. You're supposed to do color commentary. All right.
That was color. That was color.
I don't know. Ancient world you wish more people would study or be in tune with.
That's easy for me. North Africa. I think it is absolutely a crying shame that it's not taught more. It's incredible the amount of really interesting cultures across the entire north side of that continent and across through the Sahara. And it just doesn't get talked about enough. I taught it as our senior seminar last spring, and it's amazing.
Frank's going back to school.
Come on back, Frank.
Yeah. Well, I'll give a shout out. I teach ancient Mesopotamia, is one of the, archaeology classes that I offer. And I think that we tend to, if anyone is interested in that area, they tend to do it through that biblical lens, right? But that doesn't really, again, embrace like the whole richness of the history of the territory of the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley and all the cultures that grew up and emerged out of that region over millennia. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Justin,
See?
color commentary.
Oh, yeah. What are you going to say?
West and Central Africa too. Just have to add that. Just want to make sure that's on there.
Mhm.
A lot of amazing
We
cultures
did-
That's
over
interesting.
there.
Yes, we sort of touched on it a little bit, but because I'm not expert, I felt like I
that's
wasn't
completely
really
fair.
qualified.
Completely fair. Completely fair.
You weren't even asked the question. All right.
Listen.
Last one.
Listen.
And I'm very excited for this question. You ready, Frank?
Who's the best student? Me or Justin? Yeah.
No. You each gonna give Frank and I one last assignment. A book, a poem, something you want us to walk away and be like, we're gonna read this, we're gonna see this. It could be a piece of art. Anything. You're just like, we want you to look at this. And if you can both think of something, or if you don't have something on the spot, but feel free to throw it at us so we can leave this discussion having something that we need to accomplish afterwards.
Well, I would be happy to go and say you should read Helen DeWitt's book, The Last Samurai. It connects with that ethics of combat course that I talked about. It talks a lot about the movie Seven Samurai, but it's also an Odyssey story with a young man who is trying to find his father. And his mother is a brilliant classicist, and it's set in England. And it is the most astonishingly intricate and erudite kind of journey. But at the end, you are just sobbing. It is so beautiful. Can't recommend it more highly.
All right. It's on the list. Have you read it? Frank?
Spoiler. Right. I've read it.
No, I haven't, so I'll read it.
What did you think,
I love
Frank?
that pick, though. I love that pick. Like, no, I agree with you. Like, this is before I audioed, booked everything, so I actually read it, which I do recommend. I think it's a good one. Yeah, Justin knows I'll cry. I have tears. I don't care. Yeah, I definitely. I thought that the imagery and sort of like the way that the book was put together and like how like I thought it was like it felt like it was a picture. It was a painting. I felt like it was a painting. So I enjoyed it. So that's it. That's a great pick.
Can I make 2 recommendations?
Of
You
course.
can. Yes, you can.
Well, so Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, which is a novel about libraries and books. So, but libraries in 4 or 5 different time periods. Constantinople in the 15th century, a futuristic library, a library in the Midwest in like the present day. Yeah, so I think given the title of your podcast, you might enjoy reading a book about libraries.
I like that.
Yeah. So Cloud Cuckoo Land and then more recently Babel by R.F. Kuang, I think is how you Yeah. Have you read it or listened to it?
It's on my
Audiobook
wish
is
list,
really
but
good.
I haven't had anyone who read it yet that I want to pick their brain before I added it in. So I'm glad that you recommended it. Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
so good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think again, yeah, both of you I think would really love it.
Okay.
And that's one I listened to the audiobook and it's
Okay.
quite good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. See, that wasn't too bad.
No, I love
It was
that.
fun.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love the recommendations too, as well. Yes.
Well, we hope to see you in Greencastle at some point. Come back and visit
Or in
us.
Italy.
Or in Italy.
Or in Italy, yeah.
Well,
right?
tell us a little more. We usually, when we sign off, we ask folks like, how can they follow you? But we know that both of you are doing something extremely exciting and interesting this summer. So, you want to share briefly with that before we sign off?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, since 2015, Foss and I have been part of what's called the Trasimeno Regional Archaeological Project, so TRAP. And you can find us online at trasimenoscavi.org. It's a archaeological project based around Lago Trasimeno, focused on the town of Castiglione del Lago, which is on the west side of the lake. So if you imagine the map of Italy, we're halfway between Rome and Florence. And it's a field school for undergraduates. So since 2015, we've been taking DePauw students along with students from other undergraduate institutions in the United States, probably about 20 students every summer. And as of last summer, we have made some pretty massive discoveries in the town of Castiglione, including what's likely to be a lost Etruscan sanctuary. So, the Etruscans, for your listeners who don't know, are the culture that inhabited central Italy before the Romans. And we have a monumental Etruscan roadway that you wouldn't have unless it was a processional way for some kind of sanctuary, and a massive Etruscan wall. So we're definitely going back to that part of the site this coming summer to explore that more, learn more about that. After the Etruscan period, the Romans came in and they built their own monumental structure
Mm-hmm.
on the hillside that we're digging. So Roman fountain house, bath complex, all overlooking the lake. And yeah, there's a lot more to try to figure out about this particular site. But we're learning a lot about the Etruscan and then the transition from the Etruscan into the Roman period in this part of central Italy. So that's the overarching goal. And we have a new museum that's going to be opening
Oh,
soon
cool.
in the town. So we're very excited about
Very
that.
cool.
That's
I
awesome.
guess the
really
only
awesome.
thing
That's
I would
awesome.
add to that, since this is the fiction podcast, is that there is an ancient story about the lake.
Oh,
Do you want to hear
okay.
the story?
You
Well, now
can't
I
leave
do.
us. Yeah, you can't just stop there.
So the legend goes there was a nymph. It's kind of a goddess of the lake, and her name was Agila. And Agila one day saw on the shore a very handsome young man. He was an Etruscan prince, and his name was Trasimenos. And she took such a liking to him that she went up and grabbed him right off the shore and pulled him down under the waves and put him in her cave to keep forever. And
Hmm.
he's down there being cared for by her nymphs, and he's miserable because he can never leave. This is the story about how the lake got its name from the name of the prince. But the story has evolved over time. So, if you really think about it on the surface, it's kind of creepy, right? That this local goddess does this. But over time, in the medieval period and into the modern period, people retell the story that makes sense for them. So we transition to a time where it's almost Disney-fied now, where it is a nymph and her mortal lover, and he tragically drowns in the lake, and she now searches forever to try to find him as she mourns for him, and it's sort of a tragic a
Mm-hmm.
love story. But that's the local legend, and maybe, just maybe, our sanctuary has something to do with it. We don't know yet.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I
That's
am
pretty
super.
amazing.
I'm very
Yeah.
excited for y'all. I hope there's more finds for this year, and feel free to share them back with us. And I just want to say, like, honestly, from Justin and I, it has been a pleasure having both of you on this podcast with us. We both enjoyed our time at school, and I will say this freely. I think the classics and I think liberal arts education are so very important. And both of you, the passion, the way you teach it, and sort of what you imbibe from you, that's lived on for both of us. And that's why, honestly, we say we're classic studies majors with pride, because we had great professors like you. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being on the podcast with us today. We'll definitely add in our summary the links to some of the things you talked about, so others can see that as well. And for those who've listened to us, this has been a longer episode, but I think it has truly brought together sort of like ground zero of what we need to do to move forward with what we're talking about. And I hope that you've enjoyed and sort of heard and listened to some of the passion as well too. So if you've enjoyed it, it really does help if you like and follow us at the Fiction Podcast. Make sure you're doing that. And if you have any questions, thoughts, whether it's for us or our guests, feel free to let us know at the Fiction Podcast at Instagram, or you can email us at thefictionpodcast@gmail.com. We are happy to hear more. This is something that we geek out all the time. Obviously, if it's something we need experts for, we know who to call, and so do you. So we hope that you enjoyed this. Next week, we will go to Troy and talk about the Iliad if the gods did not exist, and talk about, obviously, Brad Pitt. We have to. And Professor Schindler, your favorite, we're going to go to 300 right after that. So I love how you said it's the best and the worst, because I totally agree. And we're going to hit all those juicy points. So thank you all for being with us here today. And Justin?
Can't wait. I don't know. I don't have a close off.
There we go. That's it.
I'm just still just taking it back.
Well, cheers, everyone.
Thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun to talk to you guys.